Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. This is our final regular season episode of our 7th season. It's our freeform segment. We call it the Sound Off. It's the 53rd time we've done this, episode 69.4. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here for the evening. And I'm in New York still, but in the Nolita section of New York, in a different apartment in Manhattan this time. And I've done a couple episodes here in the past. Episode 56.1, where we reviewed the film Ready or Not, and episode 57.3, in which we did the classic movie discussion Faces. I will be back in Los Angeles for our finale episodes in March, and I'll talk about that at the end of the show. Speaking of finales, my first co-host did the 1988 review with us several years ago, and also last year he did the top 10 films of 2020. He's gearing up for a rant tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Devin Michaels is here!
I love finales. They always seem to end things.
Depending on his rant tonight, it could be the finale of our friendship, so we'll see how that goes tonight. Devin's diatribe is always hot button material. Our other co-host last year did our 1970 in review, and he's the greatest sound designer in the Northern Hemisphere. Live from Colorado, Matty Poulos is here!
Hey, Jonathan. Hello, Devin. 1970. That was the big review.
That was the big review last year, and so this year you're going to be in the top 10 films of 2021, and we'll talk about that at the end of the show. I'm very excited about that. And it's time to look at our schedule for this, which has been our 69 series of episodes. All these shows are now in the can. Started with Matty P with the review of the current featured Cyrano from director Joe Wright. Continued last Monday with Devin for the Indie Spotlight, Tony Erdmann from 2016. This past Thursday was our classic movie discussion of The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer from 1947. And tonight, of course, is the Sound Off, and there you see just some of the things that we're going to be doing this evening, which brings us to who's drinking with me. I've got what might be my final beer in a long time because I'm running out of money. I got Dogfish Head IPA. Is anybody drinking with me tonight?
I pulled out another one of these because you like it so much.
Is that the Dua Lipa Truly thing?
So you say every time, and it's really a sham that I have these all the time. It's just for the show.
Well, I mean, hey, maybe we can get them to sponsor us somehow.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with this simple glass of Pinot.
Pinot Noir for Devin. Devin is the most cultured among us, so cheers to you guys and the audience out there. Here is the drinking game slide that are things that you guys send into us, things that you drink to when we do them on the show. Anytime I say all-time contrivance, contrive, verisimilitude, or diegesis, anytime Matt makes fun of me, or anytime Devin says there's something about, you got to figure some of those things are going to happen at some point this evening. Right, guys?
I feel like you put words like in a big bundle every so often. They kind of fly out, but I haven't heard any of those in a long time. I think it's time to refresh that list.
Oh, I definitely, just on the classic the other night with Kelly and Jim, I busted out contrived a lot. We got pretty drunk on that particular one. You have to see The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer to understand why that might be amusing. It's time for our societal announcement. That's my horns. My hand was like a horns, like an announcement, like a town crier. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore.
We need trombones next time.
Yeah, exactly. Trumpet fanfare. Every year around this time, we do an announcement, sort of an update on various things and an announcement about an event that we have coming up. One thing that we'd like to talk about the show is we'd like to keep track of the directors of films we review and the actors of films that we reviewed. So I'm just going to go over real quick some of the artists that we reviewed or talked about the most on the show. This past year, when we did a classic movie discussion of Psycho, we had Alfred Hitchcock tying Steven Spielberg as the directors with the most films that we reviewed in the show. Obviously, for Alfred Hitchcock, they were all part of the classic movie discussions. Vertigo in episode 14.3, Suspicion in episode 20.3, North by Northwest in episode 60.3, and of course, Psycho this past year, a couple episodes ago, episode 68.3. Steven Spielberg, on the other hand, has two classics and two currents. The currents were Bridge of Spies in episode 18.1 and The Post in episode 46.1. And the classics were Raiders of the Lost Ark in episode 28.3. And Devin was with us for our review of E.T. in episode 53.3. Actors that we reviewed the most in the show, Oscar Isaac, we reviewed 6 films with Oscar Isaac. Of course, 3 were Star Wars films, so it's almost unfair. But we also did Drive in episode 36.2, The Promise in episode 39.1, and Suburbicon in episode 43.1. In terms of women actors that we've talked about the most. There's a tie, one with Carrie Fisher. Of course, she is also in the same 3 Star Wars films, but she was also in Hannah and Her Sisters in episode 4 and Shampoo in episode 17.3. So she has a total of 5. Another actress with a total of 5 films that we reviewed in the show is Scarlett Johansson. Again, 3 of those films are related to her playing Black Widow, including Avengers of Age of Ultron, which we reviewed in episode 8, Avengers Endgame, which we reviewed in episode 54.1, and this past year we kicked off our season by reviewing Black Widow in episode 65.1. In addition to the Avengers films, we reviewed her in Under the Skin in episode 20.2 and Hail Caesar in episode 24.1. All those actors that I just mentioned, Oscar Isaac, Carrie Fisher, and Scarlett Johansson, achieved those numbers by benefit of being part of a major franchise, playing the same role. So I do want to acknowledge the actors that have had the most films that we reviewed without having done that. For men, it's Robert De Niro. We reviewed 5 different films with Robert De Niro, starting with Joy in episode 22.1, Goodfellas in episode 26.3, Hands of Stone in episode 33.1, Brazil in episode 48.3, and Devin was with us again for our review of Bang the Drum Slowly in 58.3. And for women, it's Julianne Moore with 4 different films that we reviewed in the show, including the last of the Hunger Games films in episode 20.1 back in our first season, The Kingsman: The Golden Circle in episode 42.1, Suburbicon in episode 43.1, and Devin again was with us for our review of A Single Man in episode 54.2. So I wanted to mention the actors that have passed on that we have talked about the most. And for men, it's Cary Grant. We started with episode 16.3, we reviewed The Philadelphia Story, then Suspicion in episode 20.3. Matt Polis was with us for our review of North by Northwest in episode 60.3. And just this past Thursday, we reviewed The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, episode 69.3, for the 4th film with Cary Grant that we reviewed in the show. And for women actors that are no longer with us, Agnes Moorehead, the character actress, who we did actually a special What's Her Bucket segment on. We've done 3 different films with her in it. Episode 29.3, Johnny Belinda. Citizen Kane, episode 37.3. And continuing her collaboration with Orson Welles in The Magnificent Ambersons, a film reviewed in episode 52.3. For 6+ years, we've been doing finales, whether it's like an Oscar preview or a 1970 review, a 1980 review. And throughout those shows, we talk about some of the acting categories of actors or directors that we feel like should have won based on the nominees and who should have been nominated. And I thought it'd be interesting to go back and see if I can find actors, if any actors have come up multiple times for that. And there have been, and I thought it was kind of interesting, and we'll see if you guys do as well. For the should have won category, Glenn Close has been mentioned 5 different times as having should have won in her category. In the 1988 review that Devin was on, all 3 of us said she should have won Best Actress for Dangerous Liaisons that year. So that's 3 out of the 5 right there, but that's not insignificant. But in addition to that, in 2018, I said she should have won Best Actress for The Wife. And last year in 2020, I said she should have won Best Supporting Actress for Hillbilly Elegy. So that is 5 different mentions for 3 different performances for Glenn Close. So that's more than anybody in the course of our show.
You know her middle name is So?
Well done. I will drink to that,
Yeah.
even though it's not on the list.
He didn't make that up. He heard that somewhere. It's very funny, though, Matt. Yes.
I just thought of it.
Congratulations. Well done. Anyway, for the should have been nominated, to keep going, the actor who's come up the most is actually Jake Gyllenhaal, who's come up in 3 different times for should have been nominated, starting with our very first year. Both Davey and J Money said he should have been nominated for Best Actor for Nightcrawler in 2014. In 2015, I said he should have been nominated for Southpaw for Best Actor. And in 2016, J Money said he should have been nominated again for his work in Nocturnal Animals. Jake Gyllenhaal is not something you think of, but on the show, he keeps coming up as an actor that we admired. That I thought was kind of interesting. The last little bit of data that I want to share, show stats, is actors that have appeared on the most top 10s. For men, it's Willem Dafoe, who has appeared on 7 different top 10s with 5 different films. For 1988, he was on my top 10 for Mississippi Burning. For 1990, he was on my top 10 for Wild at Heart. In 2017, he was in the film The Florida Project that made the top 10 for both me and Devin that year. In 2018, he was in the film At Eternity's Gate, which made George's top 10. In 2019, he was in the film The Lighthouse, which made 2 top 10s that particular year, but not mine. Willem Dafoe has been in films that have appeared on 7 different top 10s, which is pretty interesting. On the women's side, we've got a new champion replacing Laura Dern. Olivia Colman has been in films that have made 5 total lists now, starting in 2016, in which she was in The Lobster, which made J Money's top 10 that year, and is a film that Devin and I reviewed in episode 66.2. In 2018, she was in The Favorite from that same director, for which she won her Oscar, and that made the top 10s for both James and George that year. And just last year, she was in The Father, which made both Jim and Devin's top 10s last year, which pushed her over the top past Laura Dern, and now she has been in films that have been on 5 different lists. So, guys, that's my announcement as relates show data. You know, little stats, a little history related to show as we close out our 7th season. It's a lot of information. Pass through it real quickly. Any thoughts based on anything I just mentioned?
Just that I think you're the reason why Microsoft Excel exists.
It's true. I do keep this information on Excel. I don't know how he knew that, but I guess it was a fair assumption. It was well enough. One more announcement is part of the societal announcement, and this is something we do every year, which will mean more to Devin than it will to Matt. Every Saturday, the day before the Oscars, I screen 5 films from Oscar history, films celebrating different anniversaries, as you'll see. I've been doing it since 1988, and we will be back to doing it, an in-person version this year in Los Angeles. And so I'm very excited about it. It's the Oscar Movie Marathon. Devin has attended many times over the years. I don't think Matt did very much when I had it in New York. He has a family and stuff like that, so it's difficult and thriving business, etc. But so now I'm here to announce the lineup for this year's Oscar Movie Marathon, which will be on Saturday, March 26th, 2022. We start very early, 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and we're going to start with a film from 5 years ago, Hell or High Water from 2016, from director David Mackenzie will start us off. The writer of the film is Taylor Sheridan, who's gone on to greater success on television with the shows Yellowstone in 1883. Jeff Bridges was nominated for Best Supporting Actor Oscar for his work in this film, and it's the second consecutive year Bridges will be featured in the Oscar Movie Marathon. Last year, we screened the Coen Brothers film True Grit. At 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, will be the film The Conspirator from 10 years ago, 2011, from director Robert Redford. It's a much unheralded indie that we reviewed way back in episode 24.2. And on that show, and in 2011, I named James McAvoy as the best actor of that year for this film. He plays the lawyer who defended the woman who gave shelter to John Wilkes Booth before and after the Lincoln assassination, played in the film by Robin Wright. She would become the first woman in U.S. history to receive the death penalty. Kevin Kline, Justin Long, and Devin's old co-star, Alexis Bledel, co-star the film, The Conspirator. At 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific will be the film celebrating its 25th anniversary. One of this year's big Oscar contenders is the film The Power of the Dog from director Jane Campion. 25 years ago, she had the film Portrait of a Lady in the mix. And that will be our 1 p.m. Pacific film at this year's Oscar Movie Marathon. And at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, we're going to do the film Klute from 1971, 50 years ago this year, from director Alan J. Pakula. Jane Fonda won her first of 2 Best Actress Oscars for playing a prostitute who helps Detective Klute in an investigation for a missing man, co-starring Donald Sutherland as the titular Klute. And at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific, our final film of the evening will be from 75 years ago. On my old show, Film Revision, we studied the film Cross Creek from 1983, which has Mary Steenburgen playing Marjorie Rawlings Brown, the author of the famous children's book, The Yearling. And so The Yearling will be our final film of the evening, celebrating its 75th anniversary from director Clarence Brown. The film features Gregory Peck and the first Mrs. Ronald Reagan, a.k.a. Jane Wyman. It's about a boy who persuades his parents to adopt a young deer. The film was a nominee for Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actress for Wyman. It would lose Best Picture to The Best Years of Our Lives. So, guys, that is the full lineup for this year's Oscar Movie Marathon. Devin, you've been many, many years. I think every year that I've had it in Los Angeles, except maybe the first year, you've participated. So do you have any thoughts on this year's lineup? This is the first time I'm announcing it anywhere.
I'm coming.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Is there any of the films that I mentioned particularly exciting to you guys? Anything that you want to call out specifically?
What was the first one again?
Hell or High Water.
That was one of my favorite films of that year.
There's no way you're coming to the 7 a.m. screening.
So it's a bummer that you put that first.
We always go in reverse chron order, like every year. Should not be a surprise to you.
Yeah, that's just a bummer. I'll have to rewatch that on my own, unless I happen to still be awake Friday night. In which case I'll come by for Hell or High Water.
All right, guys, it's time to move on to the next segment. You guys ready?
Ready?
Yeah.
Things are about to get nasty. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Devin's Diatribe!
Oh my God.
This is where Devin rants about some industry-related topic, shares his opinion, and it usually gets controversial. Last time we did this, we got into a very big debate about unions and agencies. It was crazy. But the way we work is this. I've got these index cards, and so I've got 3 different topics on the back of these index cards, industry, current events, kind of related topics. And Maddie is going to choose a number, and that will be the topic that Devin will have to opine about. So that's kind of exciting.
Let me clarify this. I thought that Devin came here with something on his mind. You're saying that he's going to improvise based on these cards. He doesn't even know what you're going to say.
He knows all 3 things. He doesn't know which number's which, but he knows all 3 things on the back of these cards.
Impressive. All right, I'm ready to pick.
All right, so here it is, 1, 2, and 3. What do you think?
Definitely number 3.
All right, let's see. Is this 3? It is. All right. And the topic is awards season. I know this is your segment, and I'm going to give the floor to you, but for the audience, I'm going to clarify, because this is sort of a vague 2 words here. I'm going to give a little context for the audience, because I know you know a lot of what's going on. I want to let the audience in and then hand it off to you from there. A controversy continues to swirl around how best to handle the award season blitz. Now, I'm not sure about Maddie, but I know that as voters in different awards, Devin and I have both participated in this blitz on some level. The debate over award season is 3-pronged. Screeners, screenings, in-person screenings and events, and GIFs, GIFTS. As far as screeners are concerned, there's a big debate about DVD versus digital. Both sides say the other is more prone to piracy. The older generation is more comfortable with DVDs, and they do not like hooking up their computers to the TVs. The watermarks tend to be more tolerable on DVDs. Digital, of course, is the wave of the future, might be less expensive in terms of mailings, but as it stands, it has created some issues. Expiring links have created some issues as well. As far as screenings and events are concerned, screenings with Q&As are my personal preferred way to see a film during award season, but the bigger films can afford to serve meals, drinks, snacks, and do giveaways at the screenings to make them events, sometimes with performances, a whole to-do. Indie distributors cry foul here and feel the deeper pockets are influencing voters toward the bigger films. The Academy has gone back and forth and back again, at one point outlawing giveaways at screenings. I believe the current rule is sort of a compromise in the middle, to have screenings and do gifts, but no food is allowed to be served. That could change any day now. As far as gifts are concerned, it's sort of a subset of that last category. They used to send gifts, film-related gifts, directly to the voters' homes. Similar to the screenings, indie distributors feel like they can't compete with that, operating under the assumption that the gifts are influencing the voting. But it turns out rich people like getting free shit too, and voters want their swag. So they're upset about not being able to receive these gifts. Most gifts are currently against Academy rules, but I know that I've gotten some cool stuff over the years. I don't know about Devin. So that is the full deal. That's sort of the context for the audience. Devin, there's lots of different, ways to go here, tributaries. So I'm going to let you go any direction you want to go in. But the question to you is, what is the best and or fairest way to handle award season?
Well, I'll start by saying this. As an actor who has had, quite the ups and downs over the years of working, sometimes not working as much, and award season is the one time a year when you can measure your SAG membership in dollars and cents.
And ladies and gentlemen, that was Devin's Diatribe. Thank you very much. That gag never gets old, ladies and gentlemen. You've been watching the show for the last 7 years. You know that joke goes way back.
I think everything needs to be tilted as much as possible in the direction of an equal playing field, and whatever we can do to make that happen. It's a reality for a long time now. The big campaigns have more money to spend and are able to put their fingers on the scales for these kinds of decisions that way. But overall, I would say it's good to have reasonable regulations on it. I think it's important to make sure that there's some way for these smaller indie projects to have the same level of consideration. I don't think it's necessarily as much about limiting gifts or eliminating gifts altogether or food. I don't think it's so much about those specifics, I think it's more about what they're not actually bothering to do, which is getting more of a pipeline going of how to sort of mini distribute some of these lesser known projects to the voters.
I mean, there's so many problems that come up with that. And the question then becomes whose responsibility is to distribute? Because the way you talk about it, it sounds like it's the Academy's responsibility. Academy isn't obviously the only awards. You make it sound like it's the responsibility of the awards group, whoever they are, whether it's the SAG, it's their responsibility to distribute the films. You know, once you have nominees, it's fine. But leading up to the nominations, I mean, you're talking about 300 plus films.
I think that given the digital platforms that we now have, that shouldn't be such a cost prohibitive kind of proposition.
But it needs to be centralized, is what you're saying, because otherwise it's Sony Pictures Classics has their hub, Warner Brothers has their digital hub of screeners of FYC kind of stuff for audience members. That's for your consideration if you don't know what FYC means, which are ads you see all around Los Angeles, even in New York to some degree, promoting the film or show for awards consideration. That becomes problematic then if it becomes each distributor's individual digital hubs. It sounds like you're suggesting one centralized hub for
Yes.
all the films. And who's responsible for that?
I mean, ultimately, I don't care.
Let's say it's the Academy, so just Golden Globe voters and SAG voters and Indie Spirit Award voters, are they also all going to the Academy website to see these films?
Yeah, well, I mean, it doesn't have to be centralized literally with one singular hub. It could be centralized, like, for example, I mentioned SAG, half jokingly at the beginning. It's a fairly straightforward thing for SAG to do. They do have a budget with all of our dues that can handle something like this. It's not, again, with digital platforms, it's not a cost prohibitive thing. It's a matter of organizational and political will within these different organizations. And I think, SAG for the SAG Awards can take care of that. They already sort of do.
But not until the nominees are announced. And so, not until it's a more finite group of films, which is a little unfair. It's been pre-whittled down for you, which is fine. But then what about, those people that are trying to vote on the nominees, they don't have access to a hub like that has the 300 plus eligible films. It's the pre-nomination status that I think is the greater concern. Because once you've got it down to 20, 25 films, then a digital hub is fine. How do you get nominated is the issue.
Well, I mean, the nice thing about that is that the number of people who are making those determinations at that early stage of the process is a smaller number of people.
That's only true of SAG and the Indie Spirit Awards. That is not true of the Academy. It's the same amount of people.
Oh, well, then those other groups should adopt that, I think, because one way that SAG does keep it more handleable is that they have a smaller nominating committee that is by lottery, hopefully representative. It's randomized.
For the Oscars, I feel like all these films should be under consideration. And
I agree.
Segmenting them into nominating committees, I feel like is dangerous. I'd rather have the entire group.
There are different logistical solutions for these things. And if you're saying that it's going to be cost prohibitive for them to channel this larger number of pre-nominated films to the decision makers, then do what SAG does, have a smaller number of decision makers at that early stage of the process. But in terms of making sure that the smaller films are getting noticed, that's one way to solve that problem, is have a smaller number, randomize it, and then you can make sure it won't be that much of a cost prohibitive thing to make sure that whoever's eligible, and if anything, it helps give extra motivation, because instead of what often happens with the fatigue, all these people saying, oh, I can't watch anymore. If you know that you're only going to be on a round robin and only once every 10 years do you really have to watch an extra 100 films like JB, if you're someone who generally is watching 30 films a year or 35 or 40 films a year and not watching 140 films a year, then it's going to be a relief to you as a voter that, okay, this year I'm not in the nominating committee. They can have that extra care of saying, okay, there's 300 that are eligible. We have this small budget allotted to make sure that this smaller number of decision makers gets to see as many of these 300 as possible, no matter how much money they have, or the fact that they've given us 0 screenings or 0 wine or 0 food or 0 gifts. We're able to see it on a digital platform at least and consider those. Now, the other issue that obviously is swirling in the background of all this is what you were saying about in-person screenings. That's a whole other conversation
That was
because of
going to be my
COVID.
follow-up. Let's wrap up this digital things. I don't disagree with you completely. I'm playing devil's advocate to some degree. I see what you're saying about the fatigue. I mean, as someone who doesn't experience that, I have a hard time relating. I take my responsibility as a voter very seriously. But I guess I can imagine someone might be fatigued by that. But I would say this. If it weren't a logistical challenge to host 300 films on a digital hub for all 9,900 members of the Academy, do you think that's the solution if they could have one hub for Academy voters?
I think that probably is the fairest way to do it if it's possible.
Me too.
When it is that large a pool, it's almost more at risk of some of the behind the scenes, who knows who is hosting some of these parties that might get undue influence. If it is, open season in that early stage of the process, maybe it is better to keep it to a smaller number, even if it is logistically possible to have the larger number.
If it is a larger number, I think it almost dissuades at least targeted gift giving. Because I know the Tonys have a nominating committee, and I got all these friends that work on Broadway and stuff. Those Tony voters get wined and dined and enriched, and for the weeks leading up to the Tonys, it's ridiculous because they can target the actual people. It was all 9,900 people. The gift giving could be less targeted. So my follow-up question then becomes these screenings. I'm pointing to the Academy because everything sort of award season all leads to the Oscars, even though all these awards are technically separate. Should there be limits on the amount of screenings that you could have, the amount of ads you can place in billboards? Should the Academy, how involved should, let's say, the Academy get in policing that sort of thing and providing in-person screenings for every eligible film at some point leading up to the Oscars or nominations anyway, or at least supporting it? Every film eligible can have a screening somewhere, 1 or 2 screenings. Does that extend to ads? We talked about the for your consideration ads. Should they also be policed at a certain point? And the reason I ask this is you talked about a level playing field. And so, gift giving and special events aside, should there be a policing on amount of screenings and ads?
I mean, look, I don't think you can police something like advertising. We live in America. If someone has the money to have 10,000 billboards, in our faces, we can either ignore it or not.
How influential do you feel like billboards and ads are?
Well, they're influential in terms of making someone aware of something. They're not influential in terms of saying this is definitely good. But just like with politics, awareness is a big portion of someone being for something. Just knowing that something exists and having that familiarity is a factor. I don't think, though, that we can do much about that. It would be too draconian to try to regulate something like that, I believe.
Well, you talk about the level playing field, so I'm just sort of pulling at the strings, see how far that goes. But
it's also just it's movies, and what civil liberties are we willing to sacrifice just to make sure that we're choosing the right movies for getting golden statues?
Blasphemy.
I think an easier solution is what we were brainstorming a few minutes ago, which is if you have a smaller select committee, it solves simultaneously some of the logistical concerns that we were talking about. And
you have to make sure it's a cross-section.
Yeah, you make sure it's randomized and make sure it's a cross-section of certain things.
Racial and age groups.
Yeah, that would be probably enough of a sample size for it to be representative of the full population.
Just for the audience sake, and then I'm going to turn over to Matt, but I want to see if I can sum it all up based on my understanding of what you're saying. It sounds like you have no problem with digital. You prefer digital to receiving all the DVDs in the mail that you get to keep forever. But you're fine with digital and you're fine with the expiring links. That is, so far so good, right?
Yeah.
In terms of me understanding. Second is you want a nominating committee. You think that will help even the playing field a little more, and because it's less people, they'll be able to watch more films, via a hub or what have you, and they'll have access to all the films instead of the individual distributors trying to push them out to them. And the third thing is that my understanding is that you want no restrictions on advertisements or screenings or in-person screenings and events.
Well, I wouldn't say that I don't want it. I would say, that's not a hill to die on.
Oh, that's Zach's thing that we drink to.
In honor of Zach, who's not here tonight.
Yes. I'd like the idea of having like an X amount of number of advertisements allowed. Like there's something about that. If I'm borrowing yours now, there's something about. Is there any restriction that you would like to put that you think is fair and not necessarily draconian that you think you could put on screenings and events and gifts and things like that? Like,
I mean, I would say it doesn't have to change that much from the status quo.
Would you say there's not a problem in spite of like all the back and forth that I see in the trades? Like,
I don't think, we should get into the minutia of you can have wine but not food, or you can have food but not wine.
Or ban them all. At one point, it was all banned.
It's not necessarily about literally buying votes. It's about, we all love this community. We're all part of this community to different degrees. And why not let the community wine and dine itself? The problem for me is the ones who have zero screenings. And that's what I was saying about, if you don't have the money, you don't have the money. And like you were intimating earlier, we can't force some organization like the Academy to foot the bill for you to have a screening in Beverly Hills, but we can have digital distribution. It's just a matter of just, literally just a half dozen, workers working in it for a couple of weeks. Like, it's just organizational and political will to make that happen. That's priority number one as far as I'm concerned. And that's going to even the playing field.
We said a lot there. We've covered a lot of ground. It's a hot button topic here. I'm not in Hollywood at the moment, but normally when I'm in Hollywood, it's a hot button topic. Matty Poles, we've said a lot. Do you have any thoughts on anything that on Devin's diatribe?
Wasn't it just earlier in this show where you lost interest completely at the mere mention of the word Ethernet, and now you are an expert on how easy it is to create a streaming service?
I didn't say it was easy. He was the one that said it was 6 people.
No, Devin.
Oh, you're talking to Devin.
I'm calling you out.
You're saying that it's going to be very, very difficult to make those films available.
No, I just don't think we know. I just don't think we know the scope of it. I think it's taken care of itself. I think all what you're saying, the logic doesn't follow to me, where less people will not result in more films being watched. A smaller committee watching a lot of films, I think more people watching will get more films watched. If it was just the three of us trying to watch 300 films, it's not going to get done. If you have 100 people or 1,000 people, they'll all get watched. So I don't really know why smaller is better in that sense. The streaming services that already exist are taking care of this problem in a lot of ways. Like, if you want to watch a small indie and someone's like, hey, that's a cool movie, and it's, whatever, you go watch it. In fact, now I don't like this reality, but now if someone says, go watch this movie, it's in the theater, I'm like, oh, nah, it's got to be available. And so many films are either exclusively available streaming or immediately available streaming. You wait 2 months and it's out streaming. I don't know if you need this other new third-party thing that's going to be some kludgy technical thing just to like get another icon to click. It's already out there, and that's what's making the democratization of screenings happen naturally, organically.
My argument against that, Matty, is some people aren't necessarily aware of all the films.
What's the difference? It has to go farther upstream. So the release pattern of these movies, and whoever launches the biggest thing, which has nothing to do with your conversation, that has to do with releasing movies, and that's what gets people's attention. And like you said, billboards and front page ads and actors going on talk shows, that's what gets in the consciousness of people, and that's still going to happen. It has nothing to do with this relatively short, narrow bit of publicity. It's already in the public consciousness or not. And so then you're just oh, either go to Netflix and click this, go to theater and click this, or click on the Academy's special link and watch it here. They have to care about the movie in the first place, and that's taken care of through the stuff that we're not even discussing, because it happens in the marketing arm of all these movies and the distribution arm of these movies. And I guess on top of that, they can give you gold watches and hors d'oeuvres. But I think the availability of movies at our fingertips, literally almost anything you want to watch, even brand new releases. I watch more small movies now than I ever did, because I go to the theater for a big movie. But I'm at home, I'll watch something different. And I'll watch a lot more medium or small movies.
But when you're watching them, you may not necessarily be aware that this, if you were a voter for something, then you're considering it for X category or Y category or whatever. So, right. If it's all on this hub that Devin wants to make, then you're looking at it all at once. You're
right.
Looking at, and if you go there to see Power of the Dog, and you're like, oh, there's this other little film, I haven't heard of this, but this is eligible.
Right.
I want to see what this is.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you can just do that. I guess you can centralize it or not, but all you have to do is have the page where you see these things in a nice, each poster, like you're saying, you just look at it. It's the visibility is the main thing. You have to just know it exists, then you watch it on one of these platforms or not.
Well, to that end, with visibility, that's part of the issue. Is the feeling is that the bigger distributors have an advantage.
Of course. I guess you're saying that if the Academy has a website, you go to the website and there's 300 posters, that will elevate visibility of all 300
It would definitely elevate the visibility of the bottom 100.
But having a page of 300 scrolling posters is only slightly better. I don't think it's going to solve anything. What I'm trying to say is it's already happening in a positive direction because these things already are available.
But you also have to pay for some of them.
I mean, that's a different question. They're just getting access to the people that have the right to vote on it. Free access is just a mechanical thing.
Well, free access is what I'm talking about.
I mean, it's fine. It's better to be free, but that's not going to change your voting habit to watch
It might, because if you have free access, you're more likely to watch something.
True.
That's true.
That's true.
I would just respond very briefly to say my main point was, I think what JB, you were sort of articulating a couple minutes ago, which is it's just about making sure in that 300 or so that we're talking about that are eligible, the bottom 100 or bottom 150 or whatever it is that have practically no budget and are not readily available and don't have the marketing campaign, that they're just there on at least one place. They're sort of on equal footing with all these big guys. And yes, that's not going to literally, if we're talking about a micro budget film, but one that's worthy and eligible, they probably have zero budget for a campaign.
I'll give you a good example. Devin was on the top 10 of 2020 last year, and he probably doesn't even remember the name of my number one film. Do you?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I remember his. Bastard. Anyway, it was a film called 9 Days. But the point is, he did not remember it. And Devin had not even heard of it. It was my number one film last year. He'd not even heard of it. And that's true of most people. Most people did not have access to it. They didn't hear of it. Some of you have told me, like, you have thanked me for telling them about 9 Days because you've gone out and watched it. And every one of that's come back, I only hear about the good ones, I guess. Maybe if they watched it, didn't like it, I don't hear about it. But the point is that 9 Days is a film that did not have an awards budget at all, could not compete, but is so worthy and needed to have help.
Yeah.
And at least to be on the level playing field that you're talking about.
What's important is what you just described, the phenomenon you just described about trying to help out a few dozen of these worthy smaller films. And if they're going to be considered at all, if they're eligible at all for these awards, then they should at least somewhere have one place where there is an even playing field. And it doesn't mean that they're going to automatically get a nomination. It doesn't mean that they're going to have a shot. But it does at least philosophically provide that level playing field, because the people who do take it seriously are going to consider some of those smaller ones. They're going to see those, and they're going to take the advice of someone like you on a podcast like this, or they're going to, just look through some of those mini billboards, as Maddie called them, and they're going to consider some of those that they wouldn't ordinarily if they just had to happen upon them while they're scrolling Netflix along with TV and other stuff that's got nothing to do with the Oscars.
Do you want to respond to anything Devin just said, or do you feel like we handled it?
No, I think we're debating little points, but obviously all of us want to see all these movies get watched. That's the bottom line. I'm not advocating for less of that. I guess I was trying to say I'm happy with the way things are going with the availability of movies and the way that distribution is so much easier than it ever has been for smaller movies, and they're getting out there. I'm seeing a bunch of the movies that I'd like to see that I wouldn't maybe go to the theater for, I wouldn't even know about before. It's happening to me personally more often. Maybe I shouldn't apply that to these awards ceremonies.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, has been Devin's Diatribe. It sort of worked out as a diatribe topic, right? I mean, like, it was long. So now it's time for my segment. It's time for the top 5. And tonight it's the top 5 father-daughter films inspired by our review of Tony Erdmann, which we reviewed a week ago tonight. Now, guys, I don't have many disclaimers for this category. It's mostly self-explanatory father-daughter films. I will say, as I told Maddie P yesterday, I'm not going to be married to biological ties when it comes to father-daughter relationships. But that only comes up once in this list, so I don't think it'll be too controversial. Number 5 is going to be a very easy guess because it's the most recent film on the list and the one I will have to talk about the least because we reviewed it a week ago tonight. Devin, my number 5 is?
Tony Erdmann.
Tony Erdmann from 2016. We talked about it super extensively just the other night. It's obviously so much more than just the familial aspect. On the show a week ago, we talked about globalism, feminism, corporate culture, work-life balance, identity, and quite controversially, if you remember, Devin, we talked about power dynamics. I emailed Maddie about this. He's like, what, are you going to have Father and the Bride on there? Up until this morning, I had Father of the Bride in this number 5 slot because of fun, sweetness, and rewatchability. But the more I thought about it, the craft, depth, and importance of Toni Erdmann from 2016 could not be denied. Anchored by the pitch-perfect performances by Sandra Hüller and Peter Simonacek, this German film from director Maren Ade isn't as emotionally stirring as some of these other films, but it does achieve a great deal of meaning about the status of the world, really, all while telling the simple story of a father and daughter reconnecting in Romania. It's a more challenging film, but also a more accomplished one. So I've got Toni Erdmann at number 5, Devin.
I'm very pleased about that. When I knew that this was the overall topic for the Sound Off, I was genuinely hoping that it would make your top 5. It's got a lot going for it, and it should be seen.
I think I didn't put it on the list initially because it had been 5 years since I'd seen it. By the time I started the list, I hadn't rewatched it yet for last week's show. And also, it was so recent. Like, am I really going to include a film that hasn't had as much time to get into our cultural consciousness as much? But then I was just thinking about it. Father of the Bride here at number 5, and not the 1950 version, the 1991 version. And I was like, I can't say that that's better than Toni Erdmann. Toni Erdmann's so strong. Matty P, I don't suppose you've seen Toni Erdmann, the German film from 2016.
Nope, but I have seen Father of the Bride, and it's a darn shame.
Well, it would be number 6 now. So
6 is pretty good.
I really do like Father Bride, and when I talk about omissions at the end, I'll talk about it a little bit more. I'm going to move on to my number 4. You guys good?
Yeah.
Number 4. This film came up on a top 5 once before, back in episode 52.4 when I did my top 5 films based on Pulitzer Prize winners. And the father character in this particular film was number 1 on AFI's list of movie heroes. Does anybody have any guesses so far before I give the next clue?
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Kill a Mockingbird is correct. The next clue is Aaron Sorkin recently adapted the famous book into a Broadway play, originally starring Jeff Daniels, now starring Greg Kinnear. Yes, To Kill a Mockingbird. The film version, of course, features Gregory Peck in his Oscar-winning performance as Atticus Finch, one of the more noble lawyers in literary history. The film, like the book, is entirely from Scout, the daughter's point of view, and she worships her intelligent, measured, considerate father. The way Alan J. Pakula makes the film, second Alan J. Pakula reference of the evening, we all feel like children learning or relearning life lessons from the wise widower Atticus. Like many of the other films on this list, there's so much more going on in To Kill a Mockingbird between the racism, intolerance, mob mentality, and socioeconomic concerns, but the beacon that guides us and Scout through it all is the light of Atticus. Perhaps one of the more famous fathers in movie history. Devin, you guessed it right away. Do you know it's going to be on the list coming into tonight?
No, I hadn't thought of it just off the top of my head. When I was trying to remember father-daughter scenarios in cinema, it didn't come to me at all. But it's just when you were saying Pulitzer and famous cinematic heroes of all time, that's when it hit me.
So you feel it's an appropriate addition to the list?
Absolutely. I think it's a great number 4.
Matty P, To Kill a Mockingbird.
No disagreement. I'm not super familiar with it, but I'm on board.
You've seen the film.
I don't know. It's possible that it's like one of those older ones a classic that I should have, but maybe not. It's not in my consciousness, so I'm just going to say no.
All right, number 3, strangely enough, is another Pulitzer Prize winner. It also was on that top 5 of films based on Pulitzer Prize winners. And it's a film from our 1959 review. Not only number 3 on this list, it was my number 3 film of 1959, and tells the story of one of the more famous father-daughter relationships in history. There are obviously other people in the attic as well, but at the heart of the narrative is a relationship between Otto Frank and his doomed daughter, Anne. Patrick also responded to this resplendent film that featured several performances that we called out on our 1959 review. Patrick and I both said that Ed Wynn should have won Best Supporting Actor as the annoying dentist, and James said that Millie Perkins should have been nominated for Best Actress as Anne herself. Director George Stevens amazingly captures the claustrophobia and tension of the daily tightrope walk that was living in that attic, but also finds heart, humor, and romance. But it's all possible because of the father-daughter relationship at the center of the film. Joseph Schildkraut's Otto tries to protect his willful daughter from the horrors of the outside world, both physically and emotionally, but still pushes her to express herself, be herself, and blossom into a young woman in spite of their limited surroundings. Otto Frank's devotion to his daughter extended beyond the life of the film, of course. As the sole survivor from that attic, he got the diary published, which has touched families worldwide for over 75 years now. This extraordinarily beautiful and heart-wrenching film is a loving testament to not only Anne, free spirit cut down too soon, but also to her relationship with her patient father, who was perhaps the only one to see her potential and fight like hell so that she might have a chance to realize it more fully. After the 1959 in review, I added this film to my top 100 films of all time. Coming in at number 91, The Diary of Anne Frank is my number 3 father-daughter film of all time. Maddie P.
I don't know. No, I don't have a comment, but I like it.
You were on the show where we counted down our top 5 films of 1959, you, me, and Patrick. Have you seen The Diary of Anne Frank?
I'm trying to look it up to see if the imagery rings a bell. But I don't know. It was long enough ago where it was probably in a school setting, and so it wasn't really.
Didn't register.
Yeah.
Devin, Diary of Anne Frank from director George Stevens.
I wish I had guessed it, but that's obviously not that important. I think it's a great choice. That's part of why I wished I had guessed it. It's also strangely relevant right now. Obviously, extremely different circumstances, but something.
Is there something about?
There's something about what's going on with the challenges with the pandemic. There are millions and millions of children who are, for extremely different reasons, so it's not to be compared in certain other ways. But when it comes to what you're describing about a father stepping up and trying to do all of those things that you were articulating a few minutes ago about finding a way, even with their very limited environment, finding a way to still raise his child and give her all of these things that he wants her to experience as she grows up under these circumstances. I've been observing from afar and from near in certain cases, a lot of parents having to address some of those kinds of challenges and some of them stepping up in amazing ways. So yeah, I think it's a great example of that relationship, and I think it's a great cinematic example.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is like, I'm not just saying it's the third best father-daughter relationship. I think it's the third best film with a father-daughter relationship at its core. It's such a great, great film. I didn't know where you're going. I hadn't compared it to Lockdown, and that's a fair point. I'd buy that. So I'm going to turn it over now to one of the best fathers this side of the Mississippi. He's got a 12 and a 10-year-old. Maddie, how do you respond to comparing Diary of Anne Frank to Lockdown?
First of all, they're 13 and 11. Got a tween and a teen.
I apologize. I was off by a year. 12 and 10, I was close.
It's easy to make that mistake.
How do you respond to like what Devin was saying and the connection, like being a parent in the lockdown?
I mean, as a parent, the thing you would think about the most, or that I think about, is like, how good of a parent am I? What am I doing? And when you hear people talk about other parenting in a positive way, you're like, well, is that, would I have done that? So, I took it in a personal direction. But yeah, of course, it's an interesting parallel.
I give you 5 stars as a parent.
Have you ever seen me in the same room with either of my kids?
When the first one was a baby at my Oscar party.
That's an example of not being a good. I thought I was being a great parent.
I think you're being a great parent too. I would have loved to go on an Oscar party.
But you remember what happened at your party?
There was a woman yelled at you. Yes.
She said, "What are you doing to the baby at midnight? You should not have her here."
That's old school thought. I think you did the right thing. Maybe you went a little too far when you had her drink an Amstel Light. You should have put that in the bottle.
Should have done some Zima.
I'm going to move on to my number 2. You guys ready? Number 2. I like that. Visual representation. The next film came up on a previous top 5 back in episode 51.4 when I counted down the top 5 child performances of all time. A performance that actually won an Oscar. Now, this father and daughter relationship in this next film is not biological, probably. Even though the characters may not be related, the actors were actually father and daughter in real life. Devin, guess?
The actors were father and daughter in real life. So that's got to be On Golden Pond.
No, and the daughter won an Oscar. And she was on my top 5 child performances of all time, which is how you know it's not On Golden Pond. I don't think anyone could argue that this film is a father-daughter movie. The audience knows, even though these guys don't. I'm talking about Paper Moon, starring Ryan O'Neal and his daughter Tatum, directed by the recently departed maestro Peter Bogdanovich. The roller coaster nature of their relationship feels real and makes for great scenes. Tatum, as Addie Ross, makes clear her character's inner conflict of a desperate need for guidance and affection, but also her pride at feeling independent. As Maddie P. can tell you from our 1970 review, Ryan O'Neal is not the greatest of actors, but he does manage better here than he did in Love Story. The black and white cinematography painstakingly echoes the bleakness of the era's economic difficulty, but also manages to romanticize their freedom, even though the choice was more a practical one than a creative one. It's heartfelt, evocative, smart, and a meaningful film. Number 87 on my all-time top 100. I've got Paper Moon, my number 2 father-daughter films of all time. Maddie P., have you seen it?
I'm 0 for 4 tonight. JB.
Devin, you've seen Paper Moon. Never seen Paper Moon, even though you love Last Picture Show so much. I'm surprised you didn't go see Paper Moon. Tatum O'Neal, to this day, is still the youngest Oscar winner ever. I think she was 9 or 10 when she won Best Supporting Actress in 1973. Of course, on my top 5 child performances of all time.
Did you mention how old she was earlier when I guessed on Golden Pond?
I didn't say 9 or 10. I said top 5 child performances.
Oh, you said child. Okay.
I did.
How old is Anna Paquin? I thought she was supposed to be the youngest.
Anna Paquin was 2 or 3 years older than Tatum O'Neal. So I'm going to move on to number 1. Oh, I love when Maddie does it. Visual representation, especially on my screen behind me, like I do in LA.
I like the laundry better.
Not laundry.
Jerseys.
It's shirts hung up.
That's a drink.
That's right. You made fun of me.
You made fun of your set.
Mm-hmm. Both in a way, here and LA. So guys, I was on the fence about whether or not this next film qualified, but I consulted Jim and he agreed that it should count. So here it is at number 1, because even though it's probably the least, the one that fits the least into the category, it's the best of the films. The concern here is that the father dies very early in the picture. It's actually the inciting incident. However, he kind of hovers over the rest of the film in a meaningful way for the daughter character, though not in ghost form or anything. The majority of her motivation is making him proud beyond the grave and following in his footsteps. As a matter of fact, at several points in this movie musical, she sings directly to him, including one of the more famous song soliloquies in movie history. Devin, of course, I'm referring to
Yentl.
Yentl. Obviously, there's so much more to Yentl than the father-daughter relationship. Feminism, education, the limitations of heterosexuality, the potential hypocrisy of religion, and even tradition. But at the heart of this film is a girl's devotion to her father that defines every choice she makes. There's a lot of films where the death of a father or mother figure or even just a loved one is motivational for the protagonist. But rarely does their spirit imbue into the narrative as thoroughly without any apparitions or specters or anything as cheap as that. Yentl/Anshul would not have had the strength or knowledge to have challenged the status quo as much as she did without her father having molded her into a confident young woman in spite of what society at the time expected of the fairer sex. Yes, Yentl put it into action, but her father made it possible. You can't watch this film without feeling their relationship vividly, even though he doesn't appear on screen very much. Even though the film, like I said, is the most uneasy fit in this category, it's the strongest of the films, in my opinion. Number 67 on my all-time top 100, and the film I named as Best Film of 1983 on my old show, Film Revision, which Matt appeared on that show at one point as well, reviewing Fanny and Alexander. So guys, got Yentl is my number 1 father-daughter film of all time. Devin, you probably didn't see this coming.
I did not see it coming. It's as you said yourself, it's sort of a borderline entrant in the category at all, but I can see it just making it in, and it is a strong film, so I'm all for it. I am a little surprised that On Golden Pond didn't make the list.
Do you want to go straight into omissions, or do you want to talk more about Yentl?
It's a very strong film, and I know it's a favorite of yours, and for good reasons.
Because he wasn't going to be on the show, I felt like I could consult Jim. We had a long talk about it. He saw it like scenes like you and I did, that it's like, he understands why I would question it, but he says the father is such a big part of the film. He felt like it qualified because it's such a big part of what carries her through and defines who she is. Jim really convinced me, and I feel good about it at this point. Maddie P, have you seen Yentl?
Despite having a lot of Streisand fans in my family and talking about it a lot, I have not. That makes me 0 for 5. Why I'm even on the show, Jonathan?
Well, you had all the comments about the diatribe, and you're here to make fun of me, apparently, as well.
I'm out of wine.
There's always more wine, Kelly O'Malley's household. I know that for sure.
I can go get it around the corner, yes.
It's time for omissions. Maddie P brought up Father and the Bride. Devin brought up On Golden Pond. I'm going to start with Father and the Bride because I'm ready for it, and I already referenced it as the number 6. It's almost the most obvious choice. I think the 1950 version is actually a bad movie with Spencer Tracy and Elizabeth Taylor. I do love the 1991 version, directed by Charles Shyer, though. It's formulaic, but it executes the formula beautifully. I just really, in thinking about it, couldn't say it was stronger than anything on this list. Maddie, you're 0 for 5 with this list, so it's hard for you to say. But I know you like the film, Father of the Bride.
Yeah, I do like it. I saw it a long time ago. I remember being touched by it. It was a nice movie. I don't doubt that it belongs at number 6, even though I'm disappointed because I would have seen it. It still feels pretty present. I don't know what it is about that movie.
I like it, and it's sacrilege to my classic fans to say it's better than the Spencer Tracy version. I believe it is. Devin, Father of the Bride.
Very charming movie. It's a great number 6.
That you agree that Tony Erdmann is gonna be.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Now on Golden Pond. I recently watched on Golden Pond for the top 5 I did with Kelly, top 5 senior citizen movies. So it wasn't that long ago, about a year ago. It did not hold up to me personally. My main complaint is it was overly sentimentalized. All of Mark Rydell's choices with color palette, cinematography, music, editing, pace, all undercut the frankness with just over sentiment. I think it's a really strong play, and the film has some great performances. Henry Fonda, one of his best performances. Captain Hepburn is exquisite. You know, the Oscars were not just career awards. They may have actually deserved it that year. The father-daughter moments, of course, have that extra layer of reflexivity because it is actually Jane and Henry Fonda. But the actual plot of On Golden Pond is slight, entertaining enough, emotional enough. It captures large truths about life, aging, family, all in a small, contained framework. It's a well-written play that has its share of bumps in translating to film. The performances make it worth the price of admission, but it's not a great film to me. You know, maybe a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10 kind of a film for me on Golden Pond.
I hear you. Can I throw one other omission at you?
Sure.
Only because it's such a recent watch. My girlfriend Kelly is watching all these 1986 films for the 35-year retrospective show.
And so I probably haven't watched it yet.
It's a teen movie.
Oh, Pretty in Pink?
Pretty in Pink.
No, I've not watched it yet. I've seen it before, but I can't comment on it because Kelly's like,
yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say too much about it, and you guys will either discuss it or not on that finale show, but Harry Dean Stanton is just fantastic.
Great actor in general.
He's a fantastic actor in general, and his performance in that film elevates it. And their relationship, that father-daughter relationship, is a thoroughly charming, heartwarming relationship to watch on film. And, you know, say whatever else about some of the other aspects of the movie, although I was surprised by how well some of those elements held up compared to other films of that ilk. The father-daughter thing just leapt off at me, especially since we were about to do this.
Matty P, you can comment on Pretty in Pink if you so choose.
Not specifically, but when I was looking for father-daughter ideas, one popped up that I didn't consider father-daughter, but it is, and I don't know if you like this movie or not, but Interstellar would not come to mind if not searching for something, but it definitely is father-daughter movie entirely.
I just don't like the film. It would qualify.
I really loved Interstellar. I just didn't think of it. I forgot that driving element of it. I was very moved by that. It should maybe unseat something on this list. I'm not sure what yet.
And I don't know about you unseat. Like, I don't know. Diary of Anne Frank and To Kill a Mockingbird? You're going to say Interstellar is better than those films? I mean, Tony Erdmann even?
Maybe Tony Erdmann. It might just kick that out, even though it inspired it from afar at number 5.5.
When you had said you were going to bend the rules a little bit for a non-biological relationship, I thought of this movie because I thought you liked it a lot, but $1 Million Baby.
Oh, no, I hate that movie.
Oh, you hate that movie?
Talk about over-sentimentalizing. Oh, God.
Got it.
Yeah.
But that would qualify as a non-biological entry into this list.
It would qualify faux shizzle, but I don't like the film at all. Probably Devin does.
I do like it.
You would. Now, Devin, you've seen, it sounds like 4 of the 5 films on the list. How do you feel about the order?
I like the order.
All right, guys. I think it's time to close things out. Is everybody good to close things out? Yeah?
Can we just do the diatribe again real quick?
Real quick. One more time. Maddie,
let's just talk about billboards.
Maddie, I know you feel like you had no place here tonight, but I enjoy your presence always. Did you have fun at least?
It was great. Appreciate it, Jonathan. And I mean, if you had consulted with us instead of the Jim about these movies, but maybe I'd have time to watch a couple of these.
See, what we do is you pick one that you didn't see and you go back and watch it, and then we bring it back in what we call the second run, like we did for Jenny. Remember?
Yes, I do remember that.
We can revisit these at another time, and that'll be fun. Devin, evening summary.
Yeah, I have some homework. I have to watch Paper Moon, and I have to watch 9 Days.
It's true. All right, guys, it's time to officially close things out, and you won't see us again until our finale episodes. And as always, our finale episodes will drop on the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday on the week leading up to the Oscars. And so that will start on Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022 with our top 10 of 2021 with Matt Polis and Patrick. Following night, March 23rd, 2022, we will do our Oscar preview with Zach and Jim. Hopefully Zach will be fully recovered by then. And then the big one, Thursday, March 24th, 2022, me, Kelly, and Max will do the 1986 in review. We'll travel back 35 years and discuss the Oscar races of 1986. All right, everybody say goodbye to the audience.
Goodbye.
Fun.
All right, that's the sound off, and that's our 7th season, ladies and gentlemen. And with that, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.